So the translation that I will be talking about is an example of a translation that very openly declares its theological or denominational affiliation, and namely that's the first Polish translation which reflects the theological positions of 12 Shi'ism. And as it was mentioned, I'm not actually the translator of the work. But I'll just start with a very brief background that sort of situates this publication in the little tapestry of existing Polish translations. We have a total of 6 available complete translations into our language. And we have quite a mix, actually. There is what I would call an Orientalist, non-Muslim translation. There's one done by the Tatar community. There's one done by the Ahmadiyya community, which has always been quite keen to produce their translations into as many languages as possible. And there's also a translation that's affiliated with the Gulen community, which is a Polish translation of the Unal's English translation. There is, however, no definitive Muslim translation in Poland. There is no Polish equivalent of, let's say, Yusuf Ali's English translation. That's kind of become the go-to translation for several decades. And because there are several translations available, Polish Muslims are often asked, which one would you recommend? And the answers really don't reveal any clear favorite. And in fact, when we look at books on Islam that are being published by Polish Muslim organizations, it's quite interesting to see that when they quote verses of the Quran, they tend to use this Orientalist translation done by Józef Bielawski, which was quite a prominent Polish Arabicist. So despite having reservations about the Orientalist underpinnings of that translations, that is the one that tends to be used for the simple reason that it still remains, even though there's a few Polish translations available now, that still remains the only Polish translation directly from Arabic. And as I said, it was carried out by a prominent Arabicist. So it has this aura of linguistic reliability to it that lack a little bit. So the Muslim translations remain quite niche, and none of them has managed to become particularly influential. So with this background, just turn to our particular translation. It was published in 2020, towards the latter part of the year, making it the most recent translation. It was published by the Muslim Unity Society, or Stowarzyszenie Jedności Muzułmańskiej in Polish, which is obviously a Polish 12 Shia organization, and it was also published in cooperation with the World Federation of Hoja Shia Ithna Ashari Communities, which is an international umbrella body with quite a strong presence within Western communities. The translator is Rafał Berger, who is the current chairman of the Muslim Unity Society, so well-known Shia in Poland. And like most Polish translations, this one was not carried out directly from Arabic, nor is it a translation of a particular translation, as it's with previous Polish translations. For example, we have a translation in Polish, which is a translation of a particular English translation. We also have a translation which is a translation of a particular Russian translation. But to explain the method and sources used in this particular case, it might be best to shed some light on how the translation originally came about. So the translator, Raphael Berger, who has in the past translated smaller sections of the Quran, has embarked on what I would call a personal journey of reconnecting with the Quran, feeling that it's been quite a while since he's read the whole of Quran cover to cover. But instead of reading it either in the original or reading a particular translation, he started reading it in a comparative way, reading and comparing different translations in different European languages and available commentaries. So it was this personal journey of reconnecting with the Quran that has quickly turned into a project of complete translation based on this variety of sources, which included several English translations, several German ones, Russian ones, and I believe one. And it was only once this translation was complete that the author decided to anchor it in the interpretative tradition of his own theological school, Twelver Shi'ism. And this is really where I came in. Unlike perhaps most of the other participants in today's seminar, my main role and contribution to this translation was not linguistic, although there was a linguistic aspect to it, which was mostly to do with ensuring a bigger conformity of this translation with the original Arabic. Because imagine using such a wide variety of sources and process of double translation, it resulted in having a wide range of meanings for the same word in the target text. For example, the word muttaqin could be translated as pious in one verse. It could be translated as the righteous in another verse, and perhaps as the just in yet another verse. So giving sort of bigger uniformity to the text, the main sort of linguistic work. But my main task really was this exercise of anchoring this text in the Shi'i interpretative. So what makes a Shia translation? So first of all, there's a number of verses in the Quran in which in Shi'i reading may reveal meanings pertaining to core Shia doctrines, such as the Imamate. And those meanings are not necessarily obvious in their apparent reading, especially when they are read by readers not familiar with these points of contention between Sunni and Shia doctrines. And so these meanings are then highlighted by Shia theology, usually by providing a commentary, providing background. So, for example, and I'll try to I'll share my screen. Wait me a few seconds because I'm really terrible at this, so just bear with me. Yep, hopefully that's right. So this is quite a key verse, known as the verse of purification. Right. So to a reader not familiar with the concept of debate or people or household, and the significance of this concept in the Shia tradition, it's specifically Shia meaning might not be immediately apparent. So requires the addition of a commentary, which in this case provides three things. The identity of the Ahlul Bayt, the confirmation of their special spiritual status, and also a textual argument that is being used to argue for the Shia doctrine of the infallibility of Ahlul Bayt. So this is being brought about in footnote, a commentary. And just as a side note, this translation does not actually provide commentary for all the verses. In fact, I think there's only close to about 800 notes in this translation that provide commentary. So we did actually want to keep it minimal. Right, so another feature that is present in the reading of the Quran, and which needs to be considered when translated, is that several verses contain key words which translated may lose the particular connotation that Shia theology is alluding to. So, for example, right, we have this verse in which God tells the Prophet Abraham, I will make you the leader of the people. And where the original word obviously is Imam. And in the Shia theology, this verse alludes to the doctrine of the this is translated as leader, or as I saw in some translation, even a role model. This connotation is somewhat lost. So there are Shia translations that I've seen which opt for actually leaving the original word in the text. Our translation opted for highlighting this in footnote. Now, there's several other verses which in the Shia reading point to the prominence or superiority of figures that are central to the Shia tradition, primarily Ali ibn Abi Talib. So this is an example of such a verse. And right, your guardian is only Allah, His apostle, the faithful who maintain the prayer and give the zakat or charity while bowing down. Now, according to the Shia tradition, the third part of the verse after God and the Prophet refers to Imam Ali. Shia tradition points here to the occasion of revelation, which, according to this tradition, talks about an incident when a beggar came to the mosque asking for charity, and a ring was given to him by Ali ibn Abi Talib whilst he was still in the bowing position of his prayer. So again, in Shia translations, this would be highlighted in the commentary, providing those narrations from the literature. Now, perhaps moving beyond commentaries and footnotes, there are also verses where the Shia reading has direct impact on how the verse is translated, rather than on a commentary, on what commentary is added to bring about meaning. A prominent example of this is, just put it up, right, is the verse instructing Muslims on how to perform ablution before prayers. When we look into the Shia Sunni polemical tradition, we see that there is a bit of a disagreement on whether the word contained in this verse, arjulakum or arjulikum, meaning your feet, whether that links to faces or heads, in the earlier part of this verse. And depending on which linguistic possibility you adopt here, you can come up with two alternative translations. And the instruction will differ. So the feet will either have to be washed as the faces are to be washed, or they would have to be wiped with a moist hand, just like heads are being wiped. And so the Shia tradition opts for the wiping of the feet, which obviously then directly impacts the translation here. And somewhat similar example, similar in the sense that it bears directly on the way the text itself is translated rather than footnotes, is the very first verse of Surah 80, which refers to the incident where a blind man came to a group of people that included the Prophet, and this very first verse just says, he frowned and turned away, without specifically naming who the actor is here. And in the dominant interpretation, of course, it is assumed that this act is ascribed to the Prophet Muhammad himself. And so accordingly, several translations that I've seen actually add this fact in the bracket included in the verse, either the Prophet or name Muhammad. But according to the majority of Shia commentators, such an act, they believe that such an act would of frowning at a blind person would not be befitting of the character of the Prophet. So they tend to ascribe it to a different person who was present in that group, including the Prophet. So these are the main sort of examples of how these verses were being translated and what sort of considerations had to be given to them. And on top of that, like I said, the actual number of footnotes was only about 800. We tried keeping it minimal. In other sense, this is a translation which doesn't necessarily aims at explaining every single verse. I think that might be enough for now. I've obviously dealt with the kind of particularly Shi'i aspects of these translations, but if there are any more general questions about this translation or the audience, etc., then I'm happy to answer them.